just to get our sound steady and ready to go. Also to make sure that we have enough people who are going to tune in and make sure that they're tuning in right now. How are we doing, Jenna? Excellent. Okay, great.
Everybody hear me out there in Facebook land? Hello, hello?
We'll know in about 30 seconds.
Got it. Jenna, can you hear me?
Chelsea?
Okay.
Awesome. Okay, there we go. We're good. All right, we can probably get started. We've got like 8 seconds before 10 o'clock, but I just want to welcome everybody back to Lyon Arboretum's Facebook Live. I'm Hadley Anderson, the Education Specialist here at Lyon, and with me, of course, today is Tim Kroessig. He is our horticulturalist and our greenhouse manager.
Yes. Hi there out there in Facebook land. Glad to be back with you for another Facebook Live session and covering air layering today. I'll give you a few plant hacks that we can shorten our propagation time and get us some nice fruit trees ready to plant in the ground before too long.
So one of the things that we're seeing even here on site is that we have these, they're basil roots, they're root suckers, there's a lot of different names for them, right?
Yeah.
Can you give us a little more information about ulu and why it's doing that? And,
sure.
What they are.
So yeah, ulu is scientifically known as Artocarpus atilis, and if you've ever seen breadfruit trees in your neighborhood or up here at Lyon, you've noticed that they have a vast root system, and we have root suckers, or basically shoots that arise from the root tissue. And so these shoots offer us an opportunity to clonally propagate these trees and to perpetuate particular varietal characteristics, for example, of a variety like Ma'afala or Ma'opo, or any of the particular varietals that have been selected and cultivated. We can continue to perpetuate those characteristics through vegetative or clonal propagation. And for ulu, the desired method is either root sucker or air layer, but I prefer and have found better success with air layering.
Why is that, do you think?
I think it gives it a better chance to establish a really nice root system, and that way when you pot it up, it really takes off. It doesn't undergo the shock where if you're just severing a root sucker at the horizontal root, it goes through quite a bit of shock and stress, and it doesn't have a nicely established root system when you pot it up. So it takes a little more time to recover. There's a chance that the tissue that you've just wounded will lead to rot.
Oh, no.
And so for me, in my short time propagating ulu professionally, I've found air layers get close to 100% rooting success, and all of the ones that I've ever pot up have done really well and grown quite rapidly.
Excellent. Okay, let's get started then.
Okay, so let's jump straight into the materials that you're going to need to perform your air layer. And so it's pretty basic. I need a sheet of plastic, and depending on the size of the air layer that you're going to do, the size of the tree or the plant that you're air layering, you can cut it to size. But for this one, I would consider this a larger size air layer. It's going to be right about there on the branch, on the stem rather. And so this is approximately 6 inches by 9 inches rectangular, just like that. The second material that I need is some flagging. I like to use flagging, and this is to tie the top end and the bottom end of your air layer and make sure it's a really nice tight seal. You can use horticultural tape like this as well, but I really like flagging because it has a bit of stretch to it. You can pull it tight and get a really nice tight seal. So this is just flagging that you can find at your local hardware store. The next important material for performing air layers is some sort of substrate that the roots are going to grow into once they emerge from the stem of your tree. And so I prefer to use long fibered sphagnum moss. It's a good substrate that maintains a consistent level of moisture within your air layer, and it's a really nice textured substrate that the roots can grow into and establish while they're still connected to the mother tree here. You'll also need a nice sharp knife. I like to use my grafting knife here. It has just a single bevel. It doesn't really matter though. And then a nice sharp pair of pruners as well to prepare your material. And then finally, we need some sort of your favorite rooting hormone, whether it's a powder, a liquid. I like to use gel. And then this is just my hormone applicator device, aka organic challah fruit that's been dried out and can be used as a little brush like that. So when I'm looking to select my material to place an air layer on it, I'm looking at the size. Imagine this is coming out of an extensive root system of a mature ulu tree. And this is a root sucker right here. I want to look at the thickness and the height of the root sucker. And this is just about the right thickness. It's about 1/2 inch to 3/4 of an inch. And it's maybe about 3 feet tall, 4 feet tall. Anything thicker or taller than that is going to be a little too big, and anything smaller than that maybe a little too small to really do really well from an air layer. So this is a little too young, yep, but you can try it, smaller air layers, but I prefer to wait to have them grow until about this size right here. And so now that I'm ready to put my air layer on this root sucker, I have all my supplies out. I have my sphagnum moss already hydrated. That's an important step. It needs to be moist. It shouldn't be saturated, but it should be moist ahead of time. I have my flagging cut into 2 strips, one for the top and one for the bottom. I have my sheet of plastic cut to size, and I have everything laid out and ready to go. So first thing I need to do is just clear a bit of space. I like to work with a little bit more stem here, but you can see basically this is starting to rot, so I want to save this. So I'm going to place the air layer approximately right here on the stem, but you want a good portion above and below the air layer to be able to work. If there's too many branches and stems or some weird curve going on in the stem, it might make it very difficult to work. So you want a straight piece of stem that's probably close to 1 foot or so. And then if you need to, you can cut off some of the leaves to make a little bit more of a working area for you here. So I'll just take a couple of these off. They'll be fine with a few reduced leaves, no problem. And so the first step now is to go ahead and girdle the stem. So I'm going to make 1 cut on the top side of the stem. And so I'm just kind of looking to see where I'm going to put my air layer. So this is going to be on the top, and this is maybe going to be on the bottom. And so I just go all the way around the circumference of the stem, making an incision, not too deep, but getting through that outer bark layer. So that's the top incision. And I would say I want my girdle on the stem, where I remove all of the bark, to be, what is that, 2 inches, maybe 3 inches, somewhere around there. But again, you know, give it a try on your own, see what works best for you, and you can come up with your own technique that works best for the plants that you're working with.
Now, Tim, I have to say, I haven't heard the term girdle since my grandmother was alive. So
Yeah.
until I started working here at the Arboretum.
Right.
So can you tell us a little bit about what does it mean to girdle?
Sure. Well, girdling is essentially removing the outer layer of tissue, the bark layer, and the cambium on the outside of the stem, and this essentially cuts off the flow of nutrients and hormones from a particular portion of the stem. And so some things, the bark comes off very easily, and other things like this seem like they're a little bit more difficult, and it kind of depends on the time of the year that you do it. But essentially you're taking off that outer layer, but you're leaving the inner layer, which is what provides the moisture, the water flow. The xylem is on the inside, and the phloem tends to be towards the outside. That's the vascular tissue. So you basically just go all the way around the stem, being really careful, and just stripping that outer layer of bark off all the way around. And so that's going to cut this upper portion off from the mother tree and basically reroute the flow of hormones and nutrients and encourage this to basically have a stress response and produce its own roots. It wants to survive. It's going through a pretty stressful event by being girdled like this. And so it's going to shoot out some roots as a result. So you really want to make sure this is very clean, because if it's not fully stripped, and you can kind of see the color change now that I get down deep enough. The outer layer is kind of green, and then once you get to the inner layer, it's a bit yellow. So either way, you want to get down below that green outer cambial layer and make sure you get it clean all the way around. If there is like a portion of bark still remaining on one side, it'll actually heal over.
Oh.
And so your air layer will most likely fail. And so you want to go all the way around and just make sure it's stripped all the way around the stem. So that's not pretty. We got little fibers coming out here, so we can just do one more cut on the bottom just to clean it up a little bit, but it doesn't have to be perfect. And then at this point, if your girdle has a bunch of latex on it, you kind of wipe it off and clean it off a little bit, but
That's what we call that white sticky sap that comes out of the ulu, right?
Yeah.
Latex, because it is very sticky. So.
Indeed. All right, so that's good enough for me. Fairly clean all the way around.
Pick it up and move a little bit closer to the camera.
Yeah.
See?
All right.
Yes. Excellent.
All
See
right.
that change in color?
Yeah, so
A
girdle
lot skinnier.
performed. See one more strip here that's a little bit green that I want to scrape off. There we go. And each plant that you work with is going to be a little bit different. So some are very easy to strip this bark off just in one layer. It'll peel right off. And then other ones like this take a little bit more time to strip it properly. But do take the time to make sure you get it really nice and clean, or else again it'll actually heal over, form a callus tissue, and instead of producing roots, it'll form a wound and essentially heal itself. So in this case, we don't want that. So now the next step comes the application of the rooting hormone. And again, I like to use gels for my air layers because it kind of stays on there a little bit better than a liquid. Haven't really used powder too much, but whatever you like to use, I think it should work quite well, whether it's a powder, liquid, or gel. And so I just get that on the upper cut. This is a really important part. I don't need to put anything down here, but it's just on this upper surface of the girdle where the vascular tissue is exposed under the bark there, and that's where those roots are going to originate. So I go a little bit up the stem and right around the cut, kind of brushing it in there. Nice to have a textured brush because it kind of gets it into the tissue quite well.
If you're wondering what to do with your dried challah seeds, you can definitely use them as paintbrushes, stamps, hormone rooting brushes, rooting
right.
hormone brushes.
Awesome. Yeah, multi-use, no doubt.
Yeah.
Okay, so it looks like we're good. We have our hormone applied, our girdles ready to go. And so now the next step is to put a nice ball of moss on there, and then to wrap it with plastic, and then we'll tie it all up and have a nice tight seal. So for the moss, like I said, it needs to be hydrated ahead of time, but it doesn't need to be, it shouldn't be saturated. So I always give it a squeeze, little squeeze before I do my air layer to make sure I get most of that excess moisture out. And then I kind of take a look at my ball of moss and how big I want my air layer to be, and I tailor it to be the right size to get on there. And basically I just make a nice little, what I call like a hamburger bun, because you're going to have, essentially this will be the stem, and you're going to wrap the moss around either side of the stem. I think I need a little bit more. This is going to be on the bigger side. So I'll grab another handful, Bring it out. And I guess the size of your air layer may depend on the size of your hands too. So I have pretty big hands, so I can do a big air layer here. But
I have a much smaller air layer, and Jenna, who's behind the camera, has a much smaller air layer.
all right. So this is the important step here. I need to have everything ready to go because it's going to be a little bit awkward putting the moss on, putting the plastic on, and then trying to get a tight seal. So I got to have everything in place, everything cut, ready to go. Basically, with my left hand, I'll put this ball of moss on there. I'll curl it around so that it covers the entire girdle. Really important that it's totally covered. I kind of bundle it up, bunch it up. And then with my right hand, because that's my dominant hand, I'll come in with the plastic. I'll wrap it right around there. You want it even on both sides, basically. Kind of tuck it in and get a nice tight wrap. It's really important. You want it nice and tight, not all loose. And so before I wrap it with the flagging, I'm just going to poke any of the excess moss that's sticking out down into the ball of moss so that it's kind of concentrated, and I have maybe like 2 inches worth of plastic on the top side and about 2 inches worth of plastic on the bottom side. And I can't see any of the girdle. This is your check right here. Do you see it? No, it's covered in moss. Great. That's what we want. Alright, and so now I'm ready for my flagging. And so what I do is usually do the bottom one first. I kind of give the plastic a twist. I twisted it, and then I take my flagging, and the first couple wraps are really nice and tight, and the flagging's kind of all bunched up together, and then the subsequent wraps, once I get a nice tight seal at the bottom of that, I can kind of, and that's why I like the flagging, I can kind of flatten it out and then cover up all of this residual plastic on the bottom. You can see when I pull it nice and tight, it really gets a good seal on there, and that's what we want. Because essentially, once we put this air layer on here, this is our microenvironment that we aren't going to be adding any water, we aren't going to be taking any water out. And so from now until the time that the roots form, it needs to have just the right amount of moisture to keep it hydrated, but obviously not too dry either. Going the wrong way to this. Whoops. Sorry, technical difficulty there. Wrapped it the wrong way. They should be going opposite ways, right? And then you can just tie them off when you get a nice, good wrap. Little square knot, bottom. Beautiful. I try to always do the bottom first. It makes it a little bit easier. And then the moss doesn't fall out. And then I'm going to go and do the top. Same thing. Take a moment to poke down any of the excess moss, because if there is moss sticking out above, it'll be like a little wick. So it'll either wick in moisture and your air layer will be saturated, or it'll dry it out and your air layer will end up bone dry. Your roots will either dry up or not even form to start with. So again, I do the twist with the plastic. Got my flagging. Thank you, Hadley. Appreciate that. Great assistant.
I'm here to help.
First couple ones are nice and tight. After that, you can kind of flatten it out. All the while keeping nice tight pressure on it. Once you feel like, I didn't quite wrap all that plastic on the top. I try to cover all of the plastic that's sticking out. We don't want any of that to catch rainwater and funnel it down into our air layer.
Not too dry, not too wet, just right.
Exactly.
Looking for the Goldilocks.
That's how the roots like it.
Air layer.
Yep. And then I just tidy it up a little bit. cut off the excess flagging like that. And depending on the angle that you do your air layer on, you just want to make sure this flap right here, say this was a horizontal branch like that, you do not want that flap pointing upwards, because you can imagine rainwater is going to get in there and it's going to soak down into your air layer. So for this one, it should be all good. It's not sticking out too much, but if this is flappy and a little loose, you can put another piece of air layering around it like that to secure it. Some people, horticulturists, like to take an extra step and cover this with foil to exclude light. I personally don't find it necessary for most of the things that I work with, and I actually like to see the root formation on there and what's going on. Some plants do have roots that are sensitive to light, so it's just something to be aware of. You may want to try wrapping it with foil. It is very eye-catching as well, so when we're doing them up here, I try to have them be kind of inconspicuous, and so the foil, yeah, it just doesn't work.
The
So.
foil just brings a beacon of light onto it.
Exactly.
Excellent. Can we see, so about how long is this going to take for it to start to root?
Yeah, great question. So for breadfruit, I've found that it's pretty quick. If you have a nice, successful air layer and the moisture is what it should be in there, you should start to see roots emerge within 1 month. So pretty quick, and within about a month and a half, you should have a nice root ball that forms. And so I'll show you a gardenia air layer that I recently did. I think this was a couple months ago at this point, but once you start to see those nice white roots forming in there, that's how you know that you could potentially sever your air layer and then pot it up. So this is about what I'm looking for, is there's roots kind of all the way around the air layer. It's pretty well established. The roots look really healthy. They have white tips. And so we can use this not only with fruit trees, we can do gardenias, we can do ohia lehua. Yep. Check that one out. Pretty cool. The roots are so vigorous. They're poking right through. Red roots or pink roots. Beautiful one. So we've had pretty good success with ohia. And the great thing about air layering, again, is that it's clonal propagation. So for example, if my ohia has yellow or orange flowers and I air layer it, what color do you think my air layer is going to have?
The same flowers, hopefully. The same
Exactly,
color.
totally. Whereas if you germinate it from seed, it's kind of a chance of, depending on what of the genetics of the parents are expressed, you could have a red flower, you could have a yellow flower. And so it's a great way of retaining specific characteristics that are desirable, whether it be fruit qualities, flower color, etc. And then the other advantage being that it shortens juvenile phase for fruiting and flowering trees. So your ohia from an air layer is going to be able to flower within 1 year, whereas your ulu may be able to fruit within 5 years if it comes from a mature tree. And so the last thing I wanted to show you guys was, once my air layer is rooted, how do I go about first harvesting it from the mother plant and then potting it up? So harvesting it is pretty basic. You would just cut right below the moss ball, right about there. And then you can go ahead and unwrap your flagging and your plastic, being careful not to damage the roots. For ohia, they especially have quite sensitive root systems. So I'm not going to remove any of the moss, and I'm just going to try not to disturb this as much as I possibly can. And I'm going to want to put it into the smallest pot that I possibly can, because it doesn't have a huge root system, obviously. So if I put it in a large 2-gallon pot, there's going to be too much media in there and too much moisture, and these roots will rot. And so we want to go ahead and put it in the smallest pot possible with good drainage. And so for this ohia, this looks like a good size to me. I like to use a well-drained mix with cinder, perlite, and peat. place my air layer in there at the right height with the moss ball just at the top level of the media. Backfill around the moss ball and the roots. And then it's important to compact that media down around that moss ball and the roots that you have so that there's good contact and that the roots then expand and grow out into that media. And from here, this is a little bit fragile, so you do kind of want to baby it for the first little while it's establishing. You may even want to cut some of the foliage off to reduce the stress because it has a very limited root system right now. And so if you have too much foliage, it may undergo too much stress. So I want, for this particular ohia air layer, I would probably, because it had just a few roots, go in and cut that off right there. That's my air layer that I'm going to go ahead and stick under the mist bench, give it a little fertilizer, and hopefully within about a month it's going to be established. And at that point in time, you can move it out from where you're babying it and give it a couple more months and it'll be ready to go in the ground. But I don't recommend harvesting an air layer and planting it straight in the ground. You do need an intermediate stage where you pot it up, let it grow more roots, and then you can plant it in the ground.
Now, if we were going to find an ohia like this from seed, how old would this ohia have been?
Right, so ohia from seed are very slow growing, so it depends on the particular species and variety and where it came from and the conditions that you're growing it in. But on average, you're looking at least 5 years of growing an ohia from a seed until the time that it flowers. Whereas using an air layer technique like this, we can get a flowering size ohia within about a year, maybe a year and a half. So it really cuts down that production time, and again, it retains the floral characteristics. So you can really perpetuate those beautiful yellow flowered mamo or the orange flowered one, or ones that have particular leaf characteristics that are desirable for lay. And so get out there, give it a try yourself, and see what you can do with fruit trees and with your plants in your yard.
And this is great too if you have an ulu tree that somebody kept saying, oh, your ulu has the sweetest, your tree has the sweetest ulu.
Yeah.
So that might be a good gift this year. And speaking of gifts, towards the end of the year, we do have a plant sale coming up, right, Tim?
Yeah, most definitely. November 19th through the 21st. That's a Thursday through Saturday. It'll be staggered over the course of 3 days. Visitation will be very limited. COVID-19 protocols will be practiced, and it'll be an all outdoor venue. But we'll be selling air layered ohia, air layered ulu from the arboretum. So we have ma'afala and ma'opo root suckers that we're going to be selling, and a variety of other plants, including philodendrons and anthuriums, gardenia, hibiscus, edibles. And so we'll have an assortment of vendors offering everything from bromeliads to a number of different things that we have as well, edibles, ornamentals, etc. And natives. Huikuma Oliola will be there offering their beautiful selection of native Hawaiian species as well.
Excellent. I'm super excited for this. We're all excited to have you guys come up and buy some from our wonderful vendors and our plants. Hui Hana Lei is going to be there. They're going to have, of course, their wonderful holiday wreaths that they will be selling to support Lyon Arboretum. And we hope to see you there. Our registration for that is actually going to open up on Friday at 10 o'clock. Now, I know it's a month in advance, and that might be a little advanced for everybody, but sign up in advance and you'll guarantee your spot to come up and buy some plants from us during that time.
Spots are going to be limited for sure. It's going to be much smaller than our typical sales, just to make sure that everybody's safe, staff and the public and our ohana out there. So, but it should be good, and looking forward to it. So I hope to see you there.
Thank you, Tim.
Where will we be able to find the registration link?
Oh, the registration link is actually going to be on our main website. So just in case you don't know what our main website is manoa.hawaii.edu/Lyon. So that is where it will be posted on this Friday at 10 a.m. So be ready, be there, Or be air layered. I don't know. That didn't rhyme.
All right, guys.
Aloha. Thank you for joining us. We'll see you next time.
Mask up, take care, and may the forest be with you.